You smell like diesel and minimum wage, Olivia. Honestly, it lingers. My father James didn't even look up from his glass of scotch as he said it. He was sitting in the center of the grand sunroom, the one with the imported Italian tile floors that I had paid for 6 months ago through a shell company. He gestured vaguely at my steel-toed boots with a look of pure disdain. I suppose someone has to do the grunt work so the rest of us can focus on actual elegance, he said, swirling the amber liquid. You'll never understand the sophistication of real estate development, darling. Logistics is just moving boxes. It's practically janitorial. My brother Dylan snickered from the corner, scrolling on his phone. The tension in the room wasn't just thick, it was suffocating. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the urge to apologize. Before we watch this house of cards fall, I want to know who is here with me. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from and what time it is in your part of the world right now. Let's see how far this story travels. I didn't cry. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain that the diesel smell on my jacket came from a fleet of 200 trucks that move 40% of the state's freight. Instead, I looked at my father, really looked at him. I saw a man who thought he was a king because he sat on a throne he hadn't paid for in 3 years. The anger wasn't hot or messy this time. It was cold. It was clinical. It was the feeling of a bank auditor walking into a failing branch. I walked over to the mahogany table, the heels of my work boots clicking against the tile with a heavy rhythmic sound. James looked annoyed that I was interrupting his moment. I set my briefcase down. It was an old, battered leather case, the kind that looks like it's seen war. I unlocked the latches. Click. Click. The sound echoed in the sudden silence. I pulled out a single heavy binder. It was black, nondescript, and terrifyingly thick. I didn't hand it to him. I slid it across the polished wood surface. It gathered speed heavy with the weight of truth and slammed into his glass of scotch. The crystal shattered. The expensive liquor pooled onto the table, dripping onto the rug. James jumped up, his face turning a violent shade of red. What the hell is wrong with you, you clumsy little... Sit down, James, I said. I didn't shout. I didn't raise my voice an octave. I spoke with the flat, indifferent authority of a CEO closing a non-performing division. The tone was so foreign coming from his daughter that he actually froze. He looked at me confused and slowly sank back into his chair. Open it, I said. He stared at the binder, then at me, then back at the binder. His hands were shaking as he flipped the cover. His eyes scanned the first page, then the second. I watched the color drain from his face, replacing the red rage with a pale, sickly gray. That is the master ledger for Summit Holdings, I explained, my voice steady. You've been bragging for months that you finally found a private investor who understood your vision, someone who bought your distressed mortgage and gave you unlimited extensions, someone who saved you from foreclosure when every bank in the city laughed in your face. James looked up, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. You're right, Dad, I continued, leaning over the table, my hands resting on the wood. I don't understand the elegance of real estate. I don't understand how a man can leverage his family's future on bad deals and vanity projects. I don't understand status, but I do understand acquisition. And I understand leverage. Dylan stood up, looking between us, the smirk wiped clean from his face. Olivia, what is this? What are you doing? I ignored him. My eyes were locked on my father. I am Summit Holdings, I said. I own the shell company. I own the debt. And as of this morning, I own the deed to this house. You're not living in a mansion you developed, James. You're living in a corporate asset belonging to the daughter you just called a janitor. The silence that followed wasn't just quiet, it was a vacuum. It sucked the air out of the room. James looked down at the scotch dripping off the table, realizing that for the last 3 years he hadn't been the king of his castle. He had been a squatter in mine, and I was done subsidizing his delusions. While Dylan stood there gaping, trying to process the shift in atmospheric pressure, I thought back to where this really started. 5 years ago, James liquidated a chunk of his portfolio to give Dylan seed capital, $200,000 for a tech startup that didn't have a product, just a pitch deck and a lot of buzzwords about disrupting the social media space. Dylan spent it on a downtown loft, a leased Porsche, and networking dinners. The startup folded in 18 months. The money vanished into thin air, written off as a learning experience. I didn't get seed capital. I got a lecture about being realistic. So I took my savings, bought a used 18-wheeler, and started driving. I didn't have a loft. For the first 2 years, I slept in the cab of my truck at rest stops, waking up to the smell of diesel and cold coffee. I learned the logistics map of this country not by looking at it, but by bleeding on it. I built my fleet one truck at a time, reinvesting every single dollar while my family laughed at my absence from Sunday dinners. They saw the grease under my fingernails and called it failure. I knew it was equity. By the time Dylan was moving back into the east wing of the estate, broke but still arrogant, I was signing contracts with major retailers to handle their entire Pacific Northwest distribution. I wasn't just moving boxes, I was building the infrastructure that allowed their precious economy to function. But I didn't tell them. I didn't show up in a new car or flash a bank statement. I kept the work boots. I kept the silence. And 3 years ago, when James's risky developments finally collapsed and the bank threatened foreclosure, I didn't step in as a hero. I stepped in as a ghost. I set up Summit Holdings. I bought the debt. I authorized the monthly payments from an anonymous account. $15,000 a month. Every single month for 36 months. That's $540,000. Why? That's the question everyone asks. Why save people who treat you like a servant in your own home? Why pour $500,000 into a black hole of ingratitude? For a long time, I told myself it was about protecting the family legacy. But standing there watching my father stare at the ledger, I finally admitted the truth to myself. It wasn't charity. It was a tax. It was the price of admission. I had spent my entire life believing that if I just paid enough financially, emotionally, physically, eventually, I would earn the right to sit at this table. I thought love was a subscription service, and if I kept my account in good standing, if I covered the overdrafts and hid the deficits, eventually the terms of service would change. I thought if I kept the roof over their heads, they might finally look down and see the person holding up the pillars. But that's the flaw in transactional thinking applied to relationships. You can't buy respect from people who profit from your submission. My money didn't buy me love. It just bought them more time to mock me. I was paying a premium for the privilege of being insulted. I looked at Angela, my mother, who was sitting frozen near the window. She liked the lifestyle I funded. She liked the garden parties and the status. She didn't care where the money came from as long as the checks cleared, and she didn't have to acknowledge the daughter who wrote them. I realized then that the ledger on the table wasn't just a record of payments. It was a termination notice. I had spent years trying to buy a seat at a table where I was never going to be served. I was done paying the tax. I was canceling the subscription. I expected anger. I expected screaming. I even expected a clumsy attempt at negotiation. But I underestimated the survival instinct of a man whose ego is the only asset he has left. 2 days later, I was standing on the loading dock of my main distribution center, reviewing a shipping manifest for a fleet heading to Sacramento. The air smelled of rain and exhaust, my favorite perfume. A gray sedan pulled up past the security gate. A man in a cheap suit stepped out. He didn't look like a client. He looked like bad news. "Are you Olivia?" he asked, checking a clipboard. "I am." He handed me a thick envelope. "You've been served." I opened it right there on the dock, surrounded by forklifts and pallets. I scanned the cover sheet. James and Angela Sterling versus Olivia Sterling and Summit Holdings. I flipped to the cause of action. Predatory lending. Undue influence. Fraudulent inducement. They weren't thanking me. They were suing me. According to the filing, I was a ruthless corporate predator who had targeted an elderly, vulnerable couple, tricking them into signing over their family legacy through a confusing web of shell companies. They were demanding the deed be returned, the debt be forgiven, and punitive damages for emotional distress. I drove straight to the office of Marcus, my corporate counsel. Marcus is a shark in a bespoke suit, a man who dissects contracts for sport. He read the filing in silence, his face impassive. "This is a joke, right?" I asked, pacing his office. I paid their bills for 3 years. I saved them from eviction. I didn't charge them interest. I didn't even evict them when I revealed the truth. Why would they sue the person who kept them alive? Marcus set the papers down and looked at me. His voice was calm, precise. "Legally, it's a Hail Mary. They know they can't pay you, so they're trying to invalidate the debt. But, psychologically, this isn't about the house, Olivia." He stood up and walked to the whiteboard. "You're trying to apply logic to a narcissist," he said. "You think that because you did a good thing, they should feel gratitude. But you forgot who your father is. He wrote 2 words on the board: narcissistic injury. Think about it, Olivia. Your father's entire identity is built on being the patriarch, the provider, the real estate mogul. He needs to be the king. For him to accept that you, the daughter he mocked, the janitor, are actually the ones saving him, that doesn't just bruise his ego, it shatters his reality. I stopped pacing. The realization hit me colder than the air conditioning. If you are the savior, Marcus continued, then he is the failure. He cannot exist in a world where you are more powerful than him. It causes a psychological break. The shame is too great to process. So to protect his fragile self-image, he has to rewrite the story. You can't be the benevolent hero. You have to be the villain. You have to be the predator who tricked him. Because if he was tricked by a criminal mastermind, he's a victim. And victims get sympathy. Failures get nothing. I looked out the window at the city skyline. It made perfect, twisted sense. James wasn't fighting for the bricks and mortar of the estate. He was fighting for his narrative. He would rather destroy me in court and lose the house anyway than admit even for a second that I had won the game he thought he invented. He isn't suing you to get the house back, Olivia Marcus said, closing the file. He's suing you to destroy the evidence of his own inadequacy. I felt a strange shift in my chest. The last lingering bit of hurt, the part of me that was still a confused daughter wondering why Daddy didn't love her, evaporated. It was replaced by the steel spine of a CEO. They don't want a daughter, I said, turning back to Marcus. They want a war. Marcus smiled a sharp, dangerous expression. Then let's give them one. But we won't fight it like a family feud. We'll fight it like a corporate audit. I sat down and pulled out my phone. Where do we start? We start with the records, Marcus said. If they want to claim they were tricked, we need to prove they were desperate. We need to find every email, every voicemail, every scrap of evidence that shows they knew exactly what they were doing. I nodded. I knew exactly where to look. I stopped being a daughter the moment I walked out of Marcus's office. I became a CEO facing a hostile takeover attempt. And in my world, you don't win by shouting. You win by auditing. I mobilized my internal legal team that afternoon. I didn't tell them it was my family. I told them we were dealing with a rogue asset and malicious litigation. I gave them access to every email, every voicemail, and every digital footprint associated with the Summit Holdings acquisition. I told them to find the cracks in the narrative. It didn't take long. By the next morning, my conference room looked like a war room. Boxes of files projected timelines, transcripts of calls. Marcus sat at the head of the table looking like a shark who just smelled blood in the water. Here's the first nail in the coffin, he said, pressing play on a digital recorder. The voice that filled the room was unmistakable. It was James. But it wasn't the arrogant, Scotch-swilling patriarch I knew. It was a desperate, broken man. The recording was dated 3 years ago, 2 days before I bought the debt. Please, James's voice crackled thick with panic. I just need an extension. 30 days. I'll sign anything. I can't lose this house. My wife. She doesn't know. Please, I'm begging you. I listened to my father beg a faceless loan officer, stripping away every ounce of his dignity. He claims he was fraudulently induced, Marcus said, stopping the tape. He claims he didn't know what he was signing. But this recording proves he was desperate. He wasn't tricked, Olivia. He was drowning, and he grabbed the only lifeline he saw. This destroys his victim narrative. It was good. It was powerful. But it wasn't the kill shot. There's something else, Marcus said. His voice dropped an octave. He slid a single document across the glass table. It was inside a plastic evidence sleeve. This is the original loan modification agreement, he explained. The one that transferred the deed to Summit Holdings in exchange for paying off the arrears. It's standard boilerplate except for one thing. James signed it, obviously, but because of the property value, the bank required a witness, a neutral third party to verify the signature and the intent. I looked at the document. I saw James's sprawling, pompous signature on the first line, and then I looked at the witness line. My breath caught in my throat. The signature wasn't a notary's. It was messy, rushed, arrogant. Dylan Sterling. My brother, I whispered. Marcus nodded slowly. We dug into the correspondence. Apparently, James didn't want a notary involved because he was trying to keep the foreclosure secret from his social circle. He needed someone he trusted to witness the deal. He brought Dylan. But here's the beautiful part, Marcus continued, a small, cold smile playing on his lips. Based on the email thread we subpoenaed from the bank's archives, Dylan thought he was helping Dad pull a fast one. James told him the contract had a loophole, that they were tricking this Summit Holdings company. Dylan was so busy feeling like a smart tech bro, so busy laughing about outsmarting a corporate lender that he didn't read the fine print. He pointed to paragraph 4. The witness acknowledges that Summit Holdings is the sole proprietary owner of the asset. Dylan didn't just witness the signature. I realized the absurdity of it washing over me. He validated the transfer. He legally certified that our father was of sound mind and acting voluntarily. The golden child, Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. He's your star witness. He signed away his own inheritance because he was too arrogant to read the contract. I looked at the signature again. Dylan, the brother who mocked my job, the brother who thought he was the future of the family. He had unwittingly handed me the keys to the kingdom 2 years ago. I closed the file. The fear was gone. The hesitation was gone. Pack it up, I told the team. We're going to court. The courtroom was theater, and my family had dressed for a premiere. James wore his best charcoal suit, the one I knew for a fact he'd dry cleaned, using the emergency credit card I paid off last month. Angela was in a modest pale blue dress, clutching a handkerchief she hadn't cried into yet. Dylan sat behind them, looking bored and superior, checking his watch like he had a board meeting to get to instead of a shift at the unemployment office. They looked like the perfect aggrieved victims of a corporate shark. And I sat at the plaintiff's table alone, with Marcus wearing the same blazer I wore to negotiate freight contracts. I didn't look like a victim. I looked like the bank. The hearing began, and their lawyer, a sweaty man who clearly charged by the hour, painted a masterpiece of fiction. He described James and Angela as simple, trusting seniors who had been hunted by a predatory shell company. He claimed I had used my insider knowledge of their finances to entrap them, forcing them to sign documents they didn't understand in the dead of night. Angela took the stand first. She wept. It was a solid performance. She talked about how much they trusted me, how betrayed they felt. We just wanted to keep our family home, she sobbed, dabbing dry eyes. We didn't know our own daughter was the one holding the knife. James was next. He didn't cry. He postured. He looked at the judge and lied with the ease of a man who has believed his own hype for 40 years. I never agreed to those terms, he said, his voice grave. I was told it was a standard refinancing. I was misled. I would never have signed over my legacy if I had known the truth. I watched them lie under oath, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness. Just the clinical detachment of a surgeon waiting to make the incision. When it was our turn, Marcus didn't give a speech. He didn't yell. He simply walked to the podium and adjusted his tie. Your Honor, Marcus said, his voice filling the room. The plaintiffs claim they were coerced. They claim they were confused. They claim they didn't know who they were dealing with. He picked up a small remote. We would like to submit Defense Exhibit A. A voicemail recording dated October 14th, 3 years ago. 2 days before the contract was signed. The audio played over the courtroom speakers. It was loud. It was clear. And it was devastating. Please, James's recorded voice echoed thick with booze and terror. I'm begging you. I'll lose everything. My wife will leave me. I don't care what the terms are. I don't care who owns it. Just cut the check. Save me. James froze on the stand. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. The dignified patriarch vanished, replaced by the desperate beggar he truly was. The silence in the room was absolute. The judge looked from the speakers to James, her expression hardening. He doesn't sound coerced, Your Honor, Marcus said coolly. He sounds desperate. But we weren't done. Marcus walked back to our table and picked up the document in the plastic sleeve. The plaintiffs also claim they didn't understand the contract, Marcus continued. They claim the language was confusing and hidden. But Mr. Sterling didn't sign this alone. He brought a witness, a trusted advisor to verify the deal. Marcus turned and looked directly at the gallery. Mr. Dylan Sterling, please stand. Dylan blinked, startled. He stood up slowly, looking around as if waiting for applause. Is this your signature on the witness line of the loan modification agreement? Marcus asked, projecting the document onto the courtroom screens. Dylan squinted at the screen. Yeah. That's me. I witnessed it. And did you read the document before you signed it? Dylan hesitated. He looked at James, who was staring at the floor. I glanced at it. Dad said it was fine. You glanced at it, Marcus repeated. So you missed the bold text directly above your signature, the text that explicitly names Summit Holdings, a subsidiary of Olivia Sterling Logistics, as the sole beneficiary. The air left the room. Dylan's mouth fell open. He looked at the screen. He looked at the bold text he had been too arrogant to read 3 years ago because he was too busy laughing about outsmarting a bank. You certified this transaction, Marcus said, his voice like a hammer. You, the plaintiff's son, legally validated the transfer of the deed to the defendant. You didn't just witness it, Dylan. You authorized it. The realization hit the family like a physical wave. James slumped in his chair, defeated not by me but by his own son's incompetence. Angela looked at Dylan with pure horror. The golden child hadn't just failed to save them. He had held the door open for their destruction. The judge didn't need to hear more. She looked at my parents with a mixture of pity and disgust. Case dismissed with prejudice, she ruled, slamming the gavel. And Mr. Sterling, if you ever waste this court's time with a frivolous suit to cover up your own bad business decisions again, I will hold you in contempt. You are evicted. I stood up. I gathered my files. I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I walked out of the courtroom, the sound of my heels echoing against the marble, leaving them in the wreckage of the reality they had built. I didn't go to the eviction. I didn't need to see it. That's the difference between me and my father. He needed an audience to feel powerful. I just needed the deed. I sent my property management team to handle the transition. They are professionals who specialize in high-end asset recovery, which is just a polite way of saying they know how to escort delusional people off premises they no longer own. According to the report I received later, it wasn't the dignified exit James probably imagined for himself. There were no speeches. There was no last stand. There was just a sheriff's deputy standing by, while my mother tried to pack 30 years of pretension into cardboard boxes. James tried to take the Scotch collection. The property manager had to politely remind him that per the court order, all fixtures and furnishings purchased after the date of the loan modification belonged to Summit Holdings. That included the liquor cabinet. He left with his clothes, his pride, and a very clear understanding that he was no longer the king of anything. Dylan didn't help them pack. The report noted that he sat in his car the entire time, arguing on the phone. I heard later that he moved in with a friend from college, blaming mom and dad for ruining his inheritance and tricking him into signing that document. The golden child didn't stick around to help rebuild the ruins. He just looked for the next place to crash. The family didn't break apart because of the eviction. It broke apart because without the glue of money and status, there was nothing holding them together. That evening, I stood on the steel catwalk of my main distribution center. It was midnight, but the floor below me was alive. Forklifts beeped, conveyor belts hummed, and the massive bay doors rolled up to welcome a line of trucks returning from the coast. The air smelled of diesel dust and productivity. To my father, this smell was failure. To me, it was the sweetest perfume on earth. I looked down at the empire I had built. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't elegant. It didn't have Italian tile or crystal chandeliers. But it was real. And more importantly, it was mine. I thought about the throne my father had tried so hard to sit on. He spent his entire life chasing status. He wanted the title, the address, the country club membership. He thought if he looked rich enough, he would be powerful. But he never understood the fundamental truth that I learned sleeping in a truck cab. There is a difference between status and power. Status is a rented tuxedo. It looks good at the party, but you have to give it back at midnight. It relies on other people's perception of you. It's fragile. It can be shattered by a single declined credit card or rumors at a dinner party. My family built their entire lives on status. They worshipped the appearance of wealth while rotting from the inside out. Power is different. Power is ownership. Power is the ability to walk away because you own the ground you're standing on. Power doesn't care if you're wearing work boots or Louboutin. Power is the quiet certainty that if the world stops tomorrow, you can still feed yourself. James wanted the empty throne. He wanted the seat at the head of the table, even if the table was bought on credit and the house was owned by his daughter. He fought for the symbol of authority while I was busy acquiring the actual authority. I took my phone out of my pocket. I had 3 missed calls from a number I didn't recognize, but I knew who it was. Probably Angela calling from a motel, ready to try a different angle, guilt perhaps, or a sudden medical emergency. I didn't feel the urge to answer. I didn't feel the guilt that used to choke me. I felt light. I navigated to the contact settings. I selected block caller. Then I went through the list: James, Angela, Dylan. Block, block, block. It wasn't an act of anger. It was an act of administrative cleanup. I was closing the account on a bad investment. I put the phone away and gripped the cold steel railing of the catwalk. Below me, the shift supervisor blew a whistle and a new fleet of engines roared to life. The vibration traveled up through the floor, into my boots, into my bones. It was the sound of commerce. It was the sound of reality. I wasn't the invisible investor anymore. I was the owner. And for the first time in my life, the silence wasn't empty. It was full. If you've ever been the one doing the work while others took the credit, this story is for you. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power. And don't forget to follow for more stories about the truth winning.